Hello, my name is David Winfield and I'm the founder of the Independent Schools Portal. This video on parental engagement and communication was filmed on Friday the 20th of June, and all the delegates who attended filled in our feedback form to help us improve our CPD in the future. This form is located just below this video. There's a link to it, and I'd be really grateful if once you've taken advantage of the CPD in this video, if you could also fill this form in as well. We will find that really helpful. So thanking you in advance, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Parental engagement and communication, as we all know, has got particularly difficult and different since the rise of COVID. So we thought it'd be good to actually have a session where we're going to look at parental engagement, look at what's changed, and look at what we can do as schools to capitalise on this. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at some research that I have conducted on behalf of the Independent Schools Portal. We're then going to look at social media, which I think is really interesting because I think social media has changed quite a bit the way that schools use it. And it's quite tempting really to go into a history lesson, but I'll try not to. And then I'm delighted to say that when we look at best practice and innovation, I've got with us today David Horton, Head of IT Digital Strategy at Orwell Park, who is going to talk to us about the online streaming he's been doing there, and also Simon Jones from Bonjour, who I'm sure many of you may know as he is an expert in the field of school podcasting. To give you a little bit of introduction about myself, my name's Alicia Code and I'm an associate at the Independent Schools Portal. I've got over 15 years experience in independent schools marketing. I was marketing director at Asheville College in Harrogate, and then worked with AMCIS. And I now work with schools on a ad hoc consultancy basis, helping them out with projects that they might need a little help with. Very much see myself still as an active schools marketeer rather than a consultant who would come in and give lots of ideas and run away, because I know how difficult the job is, having done it myself. So today, as I say, we're going to be talking about the research I've done and also just parental engagement in general. I think it's important to touch upon past parents and future parents because, as we know, these have such an impact. If we're looking at marketing and we're looking at increasing numbers on our school roll, the past parent and the current parent really do have an influence on the future parent. You can see there, I've got the complete customer journey. It's a typical ADA model that you'll all be familiar with, but the advocacy is so important to us in independent schools. We all put so much effort into our marketing, but word of mouth remains such a big factor when parents are choosing a school. So, coming on to the research that we carried out, it was brilliant. I was overwhelmed by the responses that we got. 144 different schools had parents participating in the survey. And just to give you a bit of background of how we did it, if we got 5 from the same school, we looked at that aggregately for when we talk about averages. So hopefully that will be something that you'll see as we go through. The split was a mixture of state and independent, 80% independent, 20 state, and the split was about 60-40 from prep and senior. We did the survey online and we made it anonymous, and this was deliberate. I'm sure you've had yourself this when you've done school surveys. If you let people be anonymous, or you're not doing it, you're getting somebody else to conduct the research, you will get more honest answers. Following on from that initial analysis, we then did 10 individual focus group interviews of parents with children in independent prep schools. And this was to get more down into the detail of what they thought about school communication. And I think it is really important because as heads, as marketeers, members of SLT, we can have our own views, but it's the views of our parental body that need to be the ones that we're aware of. So the key findings that I'll talk about, we looked at parents' evening and the idea of it being online or face-to-face. We took a view on, asked people about their views on how the school communicated, And then we asked whether post-pandemic they thought communication and engagement in their school had either gone up or down. So I'm not sure whether these results are going to be surprising, or you'll all sit there thinking, oh yes, that's what I would have thought. But hopefully they will at least give you some food for thought. So the first one here is Parents' Evening. I will be candid, I expected that not to be as high for the preference for online. I thought that I was one of those grumpy parents who preferred it online, but most people preferred going into school. And so you can see we had 43% preferring online, and then a pretty even split between hybrid and face-to-face. Now, when we then spoke to people and said, what do you mean by a hybrid Parents' Evening? What became clear was that parents were very keen on the idea of having the opportunity to come into the school and see the school. Not necessarily for a parents' evening, but for an informal chat, or to just find out a little bit more about their year group. One of the points they made was that they preferred the online parents' evening because it was more efficient and it didn't have to queue up, they didn't have to barge past people or worry about appointment times, but they did miss that sort of sense of community and that sense of being able to speak to other parents. So a couple of schools that we've worked with and spoken to have said that they're going to still have an event for parents, but it will be a half-hour update on what that year group has been doing and how they're progressing. And then the parents' evening will still stay online. So I think it's a real opportunity for us as schools as to how we want to do this. And every school will be different and will have a different parental body. An interesting comment that did come out was talking about coffee mornings. I know lots of schools have coffee mornings where they can meet the head. And somebody said, look, during COVID, these were all online, and I work and I can't get to the school and I can't suddenly be there for a coffee morning. Can we still have them online? And I thought that was a really interesting point, because it does enable you to get the views of a wider group of people than just those who can make the coffee morning. So that might be something that you might want to consider. Another school that I spoke to, they have a 2-hour slot once every 2 weeks where parents can book 10 minutes with the head. I thought that was quite innovative. Again, that's online. And the view there from that head was it was saving him a lot of time, because he was no longer having to have parents in his office for an hour-long appointment to talk about something that could have been dealt with in 10 minutes on a Zoom call. Once people come into the headmaster's office, I think they do expect a cup of tea or coffee. There is quite a bit of general chit chat, so it can be quite time consuming. So that might be another thing that you want to consider when you're looking at different ways to communicate and engage. Now moving on. So from our surveys, this I thought was very interesting. Average weekly emails received was between 3 and 5. And parents said that they thought this was an acceptable number. I've put some quotes up there because I know we can all multitask, and it means that you don't have to listen to me quite so intently. And one of the things I think is interesting was the contrasting views that we got with regards to portals. Some people saying they loved the fact they could log onto a portal and find everything. They thought it was brilliant. And other parents were saying they didn't like the portal because they felt like it was another job for them to go in and look at things. I think the top comment on this slide is of particular relevance if you're looking for a quick win. So many schools now, when you get your email as a parent, it will be a link through to the letter. And if parents are using their email inbox and searching, it can be really difficult to find things. This was something I experienced myself. And I was pleased when I saw that other people said they had the same problem. I thought it was maybe just my bad admin skills. So if you can make sure that in that email it says, letter about geography field trip to Malham or whatever, that can actually really help parents if they're then searching within their email, rather than it just being letter for year 9 parents, which then when they're searching they can't find because the actual letter is hosted on a website. So it was just something really to bear in mind. I also thought it was quite interesting that we were looking at 3 to 5 emails a week. I thought that was quite high. The newsletter was also everybody said that the newsletter, lots of schools said they thought their newsletter was an excellent thing. It came up as the most mentioned thing that people thought was good that their school did in terms of communications. However, the point that kept coming through was they felt that that should be more of a magazine, more of a nice, oh, look what the school's doing, rather than things being in the newsletter that they had to react to. So, for example, if there was a form to fill in or there was something that children needed to bring into school, they wanted to know about that via an email. Whereas if it was, say, photos of a trip or letting them know what the children have been learning, they liked the fact that that was in a newsletter. So I think that was quite an interesting thing to find out. We then went on to ask people what they thought about their school's parental engagement and community since the pandemic. The question we were asking was, do you think that communication and community have got stronger? Has it increased? Has it stayed the same? Or has it gone down? Okay. And sorry, can somebody just mute themselves, please? And what came up when we looked at this was that really it doesn't seem to have had that much of an impact. You can see here, 34% said the school community and comms had got better, 36 had gone down, and 30 had stayed the same. And I think this is a really, really interesting piece of information. I thought that it would have been far more people saying that it had gone down. So the fact that there's this almost even split across the three says to me that the pandemic hasn't had a negative impact on school community and engagement. And it's all about getting it right. It's about doing it the best way for your school and for your parents. So I hope that anyone who's on this call feeling that their parental engagement isn't quite what it used to be will feel happy about this, because they can see that a third of the schools have managed to move forwards with this. One point that came up quite often across both prep and senior and state and independent was there was a bit of a feeling that schools were perhaps using COVID as an excuse as to not let them in the building as much. So that's just something to bear in mind. Your school might not be in that position, but there was a bit of a rumbling that that was something that some schools were doing. Another person made the point that they felt that the state schools had been quicker at getting PTA style events back up and running, and they wondered whether that was because in the state sector the parental funds was something that the school was much more reliant on. So that was where we got to with that. So then we moved on to social media. Now, I know that social media could be a whole day of a topic, never mind a quick couple of slides in a 1 hour slot. But we split social media really into two categories once we started to drill down into what people had said to us. Social media is a source of information. And you can see here just some of the quotes that we got about from people about social media. And I've put them up here because I think they've got quite a strong, there's quite a lot of passion in those messages that people are saying. So I think it just shows that social media does have an important role. But what was really quite interesting was a lot current parents were saying that they didn't think that the school social media should really be anything to do with them. So they felt that if they needed to know things about their child, they should be told as parents. They shouldn't have to go and look for it on social media. And this is something where we really have moved on. I can remember 10 years ago, people would put on the school Twitter feed that the bus was running late, or that, they'd reached the semi-finals, they were going to be back an hour later. And that's no longer what social media is used for. It's not a method of communication really for the schools. It's a source of information. So I think that's something that you all want to just be mindful of, because I think it's evolved so much. And I think social media really, it's about deciding how you want to use it. Obviously, if you've got your current parents liking and sharing your posts, that's absolutely brilliant, because that is effectively your digital word of mouth. But equally, we need to be mindful of this quote at the bottom. The school social media feed is embarrassingly salesy. does not reflect the school. I think that's something that, we need to think about when we're doing our social media. Another point is TikTok. I don't know how many of you are using TikTok, and you can see the quote I've got there is somebody saying they don't think it's very good. When I gave a talk to Padsis, the Director of Sport, about social media about a year ago, at that time, Felsted was the only school on TikTok, and they were seen as really pioneering. Whereas now, I think TikTok is something that a lot of schools are using or considering using. But I think the key thing to remember is that, yes, you need your social media to attract your future parents, but for your current parents, what role does social media play? Is all the information in the weekly newsletter or on the portal, or are you saying to your parents, you need to follow us on social media because that's where you'll find out about what's going on? And I don't think there's necessarily a wrong or a right answer. I think it's about you deciding as a school what you want to do and making sure that you communicate that with your parents clearly. Now, moving on to social media as a source of communication, and I think that this is a real bugbear for a lot of schools and a lot of people out there. Facebook groups a couple of years ago became the in thing for schools. So schools, parents would set up their own parental Facebook groups. And this was, a good idea because it was a way for the parents to have a discussion and have a chat about what they thought. At that stage, mobile phone numbers weren't handed out like confetti like they are these days. And this is where you might have found some discussions about certain things happening in your school. For the schools, this was always problematic because you didn't have access to those groups, so you didn't know what was going on. But you at least could take some solace in that they were private, in that not everybody was in them, they weren't on the open internet, and you didn't have people from outside necessarily accessing them. We then come on to WhatsApp. And WhatsApp has created so many problems in so many schools. It really does seem to be quite toxic at times. And I think it's something that we do need to talk about when we're talking about school engagement and communication. Because the problem with WhatsApp is the way that things get expedited and accelerated at a ridiculous rate of knots. If I give you just one example, and I'm sure you're all sat there thinking of examples in your school and thinking, oh yeah, that was a day of my life, I would never get back. School, year 8 pupils, co-educational school. The boys and girls have been playing football together and there'd been a few injuries. So the children were told that they could no longer play football together at break times. The next thing that happens, children phone their parents or send their parents messages, or voice notes seems to be the latest craze from the children, telling their parents that the boys and girls were no longer allowed to talk to each other. This led to an explosion in the WhatsApp group, parents complaining about the school being co-ed, them complaining about the attitude of the school, that they'd done this without consultation. And the whole thing got completely blown out of proportion in probably less than 40 minutes. And everyone was piling in, complaining about this or that. And that is a common story, unfortunately. That's not a new story. So I think as schools, we can't just ignore WhatsApp. Equally, you don't want to be in the WhatsApp group. And then you've also got that added problem where you might have parents who are also teachers, so they're in the WhatsApp group, which adds another layer of stress and conflict of interest. So I really would recommend that you have a look at ClassList. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, what it enables you to do is to have an app, have that instant messaging for groups within the school. So giving you the exact same functionality, really, as you would find with WhatsApp. But the difference is the parents know that that's hosted on a school cloud, and therefore they're not going to be maybe quite as vocal and rude as they might be on a WhatsApp. And when we did our research, we found that 86% of those parents from independent prep schools were in a WhatsApp group. So, I mean, that is very, very high. And of the 14% that weren't, half said they didn't know about a group, and the other half said that they hadn't chosen to. So when we interviewed our prep school parents, we asked them about WhatsApp and why they were in the groups, and all of them acknowledged that they didn't like the group. And the whole reason they were in the group is that is basically FOMO. They were worried that they would miss out on key information if they weren't in the WhatsApp. So they were talking about things like the reminder that today was the day you had to bring in a book, or a reminder that today was the day there was staff training and the school clubs were cancelled. So if you as a school can make sure that you are getting those messages out there, whether you're doing it on class list or whether you're doing it via a different system, and you remove the relevance of the WhatsApp group, there is no longer a need for parents to be in the WhatsApp group. And I think this is the only way schools can cope with WhatsApp. We've got to try and make those groups obsolete so that we can stop that escalation. Because you'll also find that if people, the WhatsApp groups will still exist, but the people in them will shrink. And that's fine, because in every school, you're always going to have little pockets of groups of parents, because that's how schools work. That's how life works. But if we can try and minimize the impact of WhatsApp, I think we are doing really, really well. So I just want to move on to some best practice ideas. These are ones that came up from people I was speaking to. You will have your own, and it would be great at the end if people could share with us what they see as their best practice thing. The question was, what is the single thing out of all the things your school has ever done that you think is the best thing to engage you as a parent and make you feel proud to be part of the school, and to think, oh yes, that's a good idea, and one that you would then go and talk to your friends about. You say, oh gosh, we did this. And we got a real range of answers, as you can see there. And I'm just going to quickly talk through them so that we've got a bit more context. So the Year 6 Leavers Bench, this was a great idea, a new idea, that a company that is doing a Leavers Bench, which not only engraves the names of all the children on it, but the children can also build it. So that's the lady who was telling me about that said, it's absolutely fantastic, because the parents were all really excited about it, because it was a legacy for their year group in that it would go in the school playground. And the children were all really excited about it, because they had ownership, not just with having their name on the bench, but also the fact that they were able to build it. So that was a good one. Individual postcards to children to recognise success. I'm sure this is something that a lot of your heads do, but it really is becoming even more powerful, because we get so little nice posts these days that a handwritten note really can make all the difference. And it really can make the parent feel like that is what I'm paying for. That is the individual experience. Once met a headmaster of a large boarding school, and he said he made it his job every day to send one individual postcard to a child in the school, whether it was just somebody he'd talked to at lunch and he'd asked them about what they were up to, and he'd sent them a note to say how pleased he was to hear that's what they've been doing. And he did that every single day. He said it was just his routine. And what he said really warmed his heart was that when he went round the boarding houses, the children had these pinned up on their notice boards. There were things that they cared about, they took pride in, and they kept. So I think the individual postcards, if we can do it, I think I know it takes time, but it does have oh, we've got a lovely comment saying I got a postcard for my daughter's school today and it's pinned in front of me now. I think that says it all. It's people will share them, they'll put them up in their office, or they'll put them up on the kitchen fridge. So I think it's a simple idea, but I think it's one worth remembering. The letter to the future self. This was a senior school, and it might be a bit hard to do in reception, but perhaps you could do it sort of year 3. The children wrote a letter to themselves for when they were leaving. The parents were sent this letter in the child's last term, and again gives you a real warm feeling. You remember your child when they were that little, makes you think of the school fondly, of all the good experiences. So that's another nice little touch that I thought. wine and food at parents' evening, and I've put an exclamation mark because I do realise that that sounds slightly ridiculous. And the point people were making was that they didn't want to feel like it was a trip to the doctors, and they didn't want to feel like it was part of a machine. So they felt that if there were drinks and there were nibbles at the parents' evening, it was more of a family feel, community feel, chance to chat. Parents love feeling like they're friends with the teachers and the head, and that is a fact. So giving that sort of nice atmosphere to a parents' evening was something that was really, really appreciated by people. Parent and child buddies. This was an interesting one. I've not come across this before. I know lots of schools where they'll give children a buddy before they join, but this was a school that was also giving the parent a buddy. And I thought this is actually a really good idea, because it's a good way for the parent to ask all those questions, that instead of asking the registrar constantly, but also finding out more practical things and things that impact on school life, but aren't necessarily the school's problem. So they don't want to be giving information about whether the Panthers is the best football team locally or whether the Raiders are. So I think the idea of giving people a parent buddy was also a good one. The next one is personalised websites. And if you've not yet looked at Campus 24, cannot recommend it more highly. I think it's a real game changer for the sector, in terms of parental engagement, in terms of past parents, current parents, and future parents. In the old days, when you went to look at a school or you were a parent, you got constant bits of piece of paper. You got a glossy prospectus, and then you kept getting pieces of paper with bits of information on them. We've now moved to a world where everything is online. And as a parent, this can sometimes be quite irritating. If you take the simple task of term dates, it used to be that a lot of schools used to do a little book. Every school seemed to give it a different name, often a colour. So it'd be like, oh, have you got the blue book or the red book? And that would have in that key information that you needed as a parent, such as term dates. And then everything has gone online, which is great. But if you look at your school website, you've probably got, you will have at least 100 pages. Some websites have got 200-300 pages. Now, as a parent, sometimes there's information that I want to find out that I haven't got at my fingertips and is available to the general public, but finding it on the website can be a real pain. So an example would be Year 9 parents. They're thinking about GCSE options. Yes, they will get a GCSE option booklet sent to them or put in their portal and invited to an evening. But, that information is probably on the website. And if you've used something like Campus 24, you can make a website for every year group in less than an hour. And all you're doing is taking the information that's already on your website that matters to that year group. So to me, personalised websites are the way forward. And the same with prospective parents. You've had a parent visit, their child's very sporty, they're dyslexic, and they live to the east of the school. Well, if they can have a website which gives them the bus routes for where they live, all about the sporting provision and all about learning support, that's fantastic, because it's very hard on a school website because it's a bit of a one-stop shop of a window. Amelia's asked it's called Campus 24, Amelia, thank you. And then my final one is events for leaving parents as well as children. We need to remember that, particularly when we're talking about a prep school, these parents chose this school, not the children. They invested in you. They gave you their children to look after. And when they leave, we need to acknowledge this. I think quite often we find a situation whereby the children have lots of things. There's lots of focus on the children leaving, and they have leavers assemblies, and they have little proms or parties. But what are we doing for those parents? Because we want those parents, their last experience, to be something that makes them remember the school in an excellent light. So it may be, a lot of schools will say, oh, well, we have our end of year speech day. And they are wonderful occasions, but they are celebrating the entire school. They are not celebrating just that year group that is leaving. And one school I spoke to, their head is now, and this is quite impressive. And they've started sending an individual handwritten letter to every parent, the parents of every child, when they leave their prep school, just sort of saying how much they've enjoyed having them at the school and thank you for entrusting them in their care. And I think something like that is really, really powerful, because we all know when we're working in schools that parents will have ups and downs, highs and lows with the school. That is just the nature of children, teachers and schools. But we need to, what we need to do is capitalize on all these brilliant moments. And I think something like that is another really, really good idea. So moving on from those ideas, which were all individual examples, I'm now delighted that we have got Simon Jones here from Bonjour, who's going to talk to us about podcasting. I'm sure you're all aware of podcasting. It is growing hugely in popularity. And interestingly, the most popular age group for podcasting is the 26 to 34-year-olds, which will be our parents and target parents. The other interesting fact I found out about podcasting, because I knew nothing about it until I'd asked Simon to speak, is that 80% of listeners listen to over 3/4 of their podcast once they've started. So I think that's quite interesting, because certainly I'm sure lots of you produce glossy magazines or PDFs that nobody reads to the end. So perhaps a podcast can give you a bit more of an interaction. So Simon is going to talk to us briefly about how you as a school can get podcasting going. And for those of you who don't know Simon, he is originally a school's photographer. If you've ever seen the best photos of a school, it's quite likely that Simon was the one who took them. COVID hit, and going into schools to take photos obviously became slightly problematic for a variety of reasons. So Simon moved over to podcasting. He's helped lots and lots of schools with it. And what I think is great about having Simon here today, Simon's one of those people who'll give you real practical advice. He won't say, you need a podcast, this is why you need a podcast, come and pay me lots of money to have a podcast. So I'm absolutely delighted to hand over to Simon now.
Thanks, Alicia. It's really good to be here, and thanks everyone for giving up your time, especially at lunchtime, because I do recognise that's a precious time. So I'm going to talk about podcasting for school marketing. I'm not going to be sharing my screen at all with any kind of PowerPoint. I'm going to be staying here and actually just talking to you like this. So if you can see me, then that's good. I'm going to have a couple of things pop up on the screen, because really I'm going to break this down into 3 areas. This is just going to be a 10-minute piece, and this is kind of a 3x3. So I'm going to talk about podcasting, what it is, first of all, just so that everybody understands what exactly we're talking about. Secondly, why do it and why it's important from a school marketing point of view. And then number 3, how to go about doing it. And the why to do it is a really important thing. My whole background is marketing. Before I was working with school marketing managers, I spent 15 years being a marketing manager myself. And so all I did really was to start providing tools to school marketing people, photography, video, and now podcasting, in order to help you with your own marketing. So let's just jump back. So actually, if we're looking at what podcasting really is, well, first of all, let's look at what it's not. And what it isn't is, and what I'm not here talking to you about, is about my own podcast, where I invite individuals from different schools onto my podcast. It's not that at all. If you have your own podcast for school marketing, then it is your school podcast. So it is very much your thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is essentially social media. And, we're all familiar with social media along the lines of visual social media, where you put a photograph up on Instagram, for example. We're familiar with visual and audio, where you put a video, for example, on a YouTube channel or on Facebook or on Instagram, somewhere like that. But a podcast, generally speaking, is audio only. You do get some people in America and in the UK as well, but mainly in America, where they do video as well with a podcast. But generally speaking, when people are talking podcasting, they're talking about audio only. And Alicia, I'm really glad you mentioned that statistic about lots of people staying and listening all the way through, because that is what people do. And the third thing to say about what it is that podcast episodes are typically around about 20 minutes long. So if you imagine that, having a website on your video is a good thing to do, and, that's the background that I've come from, but getting people to stop what they're doing and watch a video for 3 minutes is quite hard going. But if you have a 20-minute podcast episode, then people carry on listening to that for a good chunk of it. good 15 minutes. Quite often they listen all the way through to the end. In terms of frequency, it could be anywhere from one a week through to, say, one a term. So if you're doing one a term, that's just 3 a year. So it's less work involved in that, of course, but then of course you're getting less traction involved because you don't have a regular sort of every Wednesday a podcast episode coming out. I know that some of you right now are thinking, gosh, a podcast episode one a week, there's no way at all that we can manage that. And I get that. I really do get that. Okay, but moving on then, and keeping an eye on time. Why do it? Why do podcasting? Well, one of the main things is that more and more people are listening to podcasts as a way of digesting information. And one of the reasons that they're doing this is because when you listen to a podcast, you don't stop what you're doing already. And that's the really important part. And that's why Alicia was saying that statistic, that people carry on listening all the way through, because people listen to a podcast in one of 3 places, mainly. They're in the car commuting to work, or they are out walking the dog, or they're in the gym. And in all 3 of those situations, they're already doing something else. And those things that they're doing, they can't actually stop and watch a video at the same time. It's not a good idea to do that when you're driving, for sure. But you can actually listen to a podcast when you're driving to work. Now, if it's a 20-minute episode, then that's a nice duration for most people, where they're not spending the whole journey listening to that podcast episode, but they're spending 20 minutes hearing more about the school community, hearing the head, for example, talking about their background from before they went into that school, before they went into education, what they were like when they were a child, what they were like when they were at university, even sort of what holidays they enjoy doing with their family, what music they were into when they were younger, what they're into now, what they like doing at the weekends when they're not at school, that kind of thing. But the second reason about why do it is that it really is authentic marketing. You probably remember this guy here from BBC from a few years ago. And this was from before COVID. This was clearly from a time where it was kind of important to present yourself properly when you're at home and always put a front on things. But these days, we've kind of moved along a bit where, because of COVID, that authentic approach where people are more themselves is much more acceptable, and people crave more of that going on. So people really want to know what life is genuinely like inside the school, as opposed to just reading a prospectus. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a prospectus, but as well as the prospectus, they really want to know genuinely what it's actually like there. And the third reason about why to do it is that it does provide a deeper connection with the whole school community, because people do listen and find out about the people that are being featured on each episode. And it could be a member of SLT, but actually would absolutely recommend not to just have SLT, but also to have the pupils on there, to get the parents on there, either individually or 2 or 3 parents talking together with someone who's asking them some questions, nudging them in the right direction, because then they just feel more relaxed, and parents love hearing other parents talking about their experience of being a parent at that school. But also to get some of your alumni back on, talking about how the school helped them to become the person that they are, and that kind of thing. So it creates this very deep connection, because you plug in earphones and you're in the gym and you're on the treadmill and you're listening to the head telling their story from when they were younger, then it allows you to generate that connection. There's a great story I heard of the head of a prep school in northeast London, and every morning there was a dad who would drop off his son at the school, and they didn't have a bad relationship, the head and the dad, but they didn't gel very well. They just didn't really get on. But then there was a podcast episode where the head was talking quite candidly about how he enjoys heli skiing, where you jump out of a helicopter and you go skiing off piste. And the very next day, the dad dropped his son off and came up and spoke to the head teacher and said, "I had no idea that you're into heli skiing. This is a big passion of mine." They then spoke for half an hour on heli skiing, and now they're best buddies. So this kind of thing is a great thing to do, by generating those deeper connections with the whole school community. But then thirdly, how to do it. And this is where I'm going to start coming to an end. I'm 8 minutes now already. Really, there are 3 different ways of doing this. And option 1, option 2, or option 3. Option 1 is all about where you engage with a company and that company can do everything for you. So they'll create the podcast channel for you, and then it belongs to you in your school. They can run it for you. They can manage the whole thing. They can provide an interviewer, someone to be the Graham Norton, to get the best from each guest who comes on to each episode, to really get down into, asking those backstory questions, because everyone's always got a backstory, and then doing the editing and then uploading and then publishing it to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all of those other places where people normally listen to a podcast. That's option one. Find someone who can do the whole lot for you. Option two is kind of the same as option one, but it's where you involve the students or a member of staff in your school, and you provide the Graham Norton in your school. And that can be great for some schools. For other schools, they don't have the capacity for that. But some schools, they really want to engage the children, get the children asking questions to the head, get the children asking questions. You engage some of the people to be doing the questioning. But then option three is actually where you involve more people in the school and you do everything yourselves, where you create the channel, you do the editing yourself. And this really is a good opportunity to involve the children and then to get them learning and then doing the actual podcast itself. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat because there's a couple of questions there. It'd be great if you could share the company information. Right. Okay, right. Now, the other thing then is just coming to an end here. Let me just bring my notes back. Okay, really, it's the most important thing about this, which is that where you put your podcast, because it's quite easy actually to do a podcast badly. And what some schools have done, and this is the thing not to do, is to create your own podcast, have an episode and put it on the school website, because that's not where your audience normally goes to listen to their podcast. Maybe people listen to a podcast on like BBC, they might listen to a podcast on Formula One or Flowers or I don't know, whatever people are into. And if they're listening to those podcasts, they're going to be on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or a few other places, but they won't be going to those individual websites to listen to those individual podcasts. So if you create your own podcast and put it onto your school website and only have it there, that's not a good place. People aren't going to navigate there when they're out walking the dog. They want to go to where they normally listen to their podcasts. Now, the last thing I'll say is that we as a business, we're not doing podcast. I'm not telling you that podcasting is a good thing to do just because that's what we do. Instead, we do podcasting because we genuinely believe it's a great thing to do in the world of school marketing. I'm going to bring my piece to an end now. But thank you very much for listening to this. If anyone has any questions, then do please shout or get in touch with me. My email address is simon@thebonjouragency.com. I've tried to keep this as zero selling as possible. So really, I'm here to help. And if anyone has any questions, then I'm very, very happy to answer either now or by email afterwards. Thank you very much. Alicia.
Thank you, Simon. That was great. We have got, you did keep it very unsalesy, and that has left with people saying, how much do you roughly charge? They'd like some costs. What I have done is on the feedback form, if you can all fill that in, there's the opportunity to request more information. So Simon can send through some details. My understanding, Simon, is that your prices vary massively from whether you're sort of doing a quick workshop to get people going or whether you're helping do the entire process. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if people want us to do the whole process, we can absolutely do that. Essentially, there's a monthly charge and then a per episode charge. But if you go onto the website, thebonjouragency.com, then there's a section in there under the options, and then you can request the pricing, and it just comes straight through to you by email. So it's all there in the public domain.
Great. And if you do fill the form in, one of the things that we are looking at is getting Simon back for a longer session to do a proper workshop on podcasting. So there's going to be that opportunity if you complete the form. So thank you, Simon. Clearly people were engaged because we had lots of questions. I'm now delighted to welcome David Horton from Orwell Park, because he too has been doing really innovative things, not least in the world of online streaming. So I'm delighted David's joining us. I was given his name and somebody said, oh yes, you must get David Horton to speak to you. He's doing great things. And he said, yes, that's fine, at literally less than a week's notice. So I too am looking forward to hearing what David's got to say. So over to you, David.
Thank you. Yeah, you're coming on a good week. It's we've got year 7 and 8 away on trips at the moment, so my timetable is nice and clear. I am going to share a presentation. I'm not going to sell anything. I've got nothing to sell, particularly. So I will just spin up this presentation, and you don't have to look at my ugly mug for the next thing. I will do share sound. I'm going to try and play video a little bit, inevitably, but it's not essential to the flow of everything. So let's see how we go. Splash screen is going to wake up. It is right. So I'm going to blast through this. It's very difficult to cover off live streaming in the space of sort of 10 minutes or so, because there's quite a lot of elements to it. But so what I'll do is try and give you some of the major way markers on the road. So really 3 prerequisites to get streaming going. Firstly is to get a camera. Obviously, you need to get something in there, or cameras. Can it cope? So when we're talking about can a camera cope, can it cope with the light levels? Is it actually going to work properly? Really, if you haven't got a camera that's going to serve your purposes at the outset, then there's no point sort of plowing through everything else. You can use an iPhone or an iPad camera. They do work. They're pretty good. You'll find in certain light levels they'll struggle. The next thing you want to consider is what's your interface to the camera itself. So it might be an HDMI, just a straightforward video signal coming out of the back of a camera. It could be over Wi-Fi, so some webcams, things like... or there's this thing called NDI, which a lot of people aren't very familiar with, but it's essentially a network. It's a network video protocol, and it's very popular in proper studios and things. But what it's nice about it is it's unifying lots of different types of cameras. So knowing kind of how your camera's going to talk to the rest of the system is really, really important. And then also the question, do you need an operator? So I've used cameras with operators, usually students, sometimes me, sometimes another member of staff, and I've used them without, and they have different purposes. Your operator doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's holding a camera in their hands. They could be a digital operator, and I'll show you a bit of a video later of somebody who is operating cameras remotely via an iPad. But it's always those things. I think it's one of those things that's very open, a little bit like podcasting, where it kind of depends how hard you want to go at it and how complicated you want to make it for yourself. After you've considered your camera, you need to consider production. So what inputs do you need? That's obviously dictated by your camera. Do you need HDMI inputs? Do you need something that's going to feed in from Wi-Fi? Do you need something that's going to talk NDI? Are you going to manually control that? Are you going to have somebody sat there actually saying, I want camera 1, camera 2, camera 3? And then also your sort of graphics that you might want to put on there. So we often put like a school logo on there or something else, so you might want to fatten it up. Again, we've tried loads of different things. We've tried OBS, which is a software production system. It's free, sits on a laptop. I've used a thing called an NS Caster, which is a dedicated touchscreen production facility. I've used something called an ATEM. I can't remember the actual. The ATEM's the manufacturer. Blackmagic is the manufacturer of the ATEM something or other, but it's basically a physical switcher which allows you to switch between cameras, and they vary. And sometimes in my favorite system at the moment actually has an iPad app, or an iPhone app for that matter, where you can switch between, and everything's run from the app. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So I can't give you lots of answers. I've only got 10 minutes. I can't go through things, but you've got to think about that. How are you actually going to produce what you're going to do? And finally, where is it going to go? There are so many destinations for your live streams. I've used Facebook, I've used Vimeo, I've used YouTube, I've used something called Dacast. There's lots and lots of different services out there. Some are paid services, some are not paid services, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So I'm probably making it sound complicated, and in some ways it is complicated because you've got to deal with all these different elements that kind of all together as one thing. But really, once you've decided on the camera, once you've decided on your production, and once you've decided on your destination, it's then not too bad to then sort of go and get on with it. I've tried lots of things. YouTube is great. Nice and simple to use, but the problem with YouTube, for instance, is that if the stream drops and it regenerates the stream, you've got to send out a whole new link to it and that sort of thing. something like Vimeo, I find much more easy. I can always just use the same link on Vimeo, but then the watchers have to log into Vimeo to watch it. So everything's got its strengths and weaknesses, and it really is just a case of sitting down a little bit, having to play, or having a chat with somebody like me at more length to do that. The social media stuff can work quite well. Sometimes you've got difficulties with streaming to social media. They say, oh, we want you to have 10,000 followers before we let you live stream in a certain way. But again, it's all an option. Moving on, things that we've tried. So we've tried multiple HDMI, so lots of HDMI cameras with the 8M switcher. We've tried, I'm going to talk quite a lot about the Mevo camera in the bit of time I've got available. The Mevo camera is very, very powerful little thing sold by Logitech, and I'll come back to that. NDI, we've used NDI, so we've put certain cameras into NDI mode and sort of put a networked editor in place to try and pull things in from different locations, which is very impressive, but it's quite hard work. And then I've also done stuff with using lots of Mevo cameras together, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that as well. So I know when you come to these things, what you want is answers to questions, and not necessarily questions that you're going to ask. But the challenge, from my point of view, on this is just time. So all I'm going to do is just give you some examples of what I've done and just show you what's possible, really. And I think that's probably the best thing I can do in the short time available. So I've lost my thing out of focus. Oh yeah, some of the stuff we streamed. It's a very quick thing just to give you an idea of everything of what we've tried to stream. This is really useful because it gets you to think about, it gets you to think creatively about, oh, can we stream that? Can we not stream? So music competitions, lots of recitals in our orangery, concerts, Christmas concerts, poetry competitions. You can see, you can read it for yourself. I'm going to talk about two of these. Battle of the Bands is quite an interesting one. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the Orwell Park Mile. I'm going to talk about Sports Day 2022, just to give you two examples, because they were particularly challenging ones to have a go at. So this was my cross country, and this is something that I chose to do via NDI. So this was early in when we were really kind of pushing the boundaries and seeing what we could do. And we had you can see from the different positions there. So I've got the different locations there. So I had a pan-tilt zoom camera on top of a tower. I had a stills camera, just a conventional HDMI camera plugged in it was a cross country, so it was on the finishing line. A mixed position, which is just where we sat to do everything. The Mevo actually is capable of running in NDI, and I used this one in NDI mode. It's a fully wireless thing, and you'll see how that works in a moment. I think I've got some footage of that. A huddle cam, which is just another type of camera. And then one thing I was quite pleased with this one was we actually had a student with a belt pack of something called a live view unit, and they were free to walk around with a camera on their shoulder, feeling like a BBC outside broadcast hero, going around and actually filming the children wherever they wanted to be. And it gave quite a reasonable effect. I've got about a minute of example video to show you from this, and I'll talk over it at the same time because there's not a lot of audio. So this is the huddle cam. It was alongside our pre-prep. This is a wide camera, so you can imagine there's a building just to the left there with a wire going in through a window. You can see you get a really good quality. The cam's quite popular. That was the pan-tilt zoom camera on top of the tower. So this goes to a 32 zoom. It would probably zoom in pretty much to fill, if you look at the hose pipes just by the big hose pipe reels to the right, to the left of that fence just off the center, it would probably zoom right into there. This, as you can probably gather, is my roving cameraman. So you'll see the quality is a little bit more questionable because it's having to stream from his camera. But again, it's not about how we necessarily did that. It's just about kind of getting a sense of what's possible. Okay, so I'm going to skip on from this video because I think we've seen enough of that. So this is the other one I did recently, one I did much more recently, which was a sports day. It's a similar kind of challenge. But this time I just did it using a wireless mesh access point on the Wi-Fi and 3 Mevos. And what I did actually on the day itself, this was only a couple of weeks ago, I shot a little video, a very short video, which I'll play to you now, just showing you what we can actually do in terms of streaming. The Mevo, it was being run from the app itself. So we had the Mevo multicam app running, and that was the thing managing the stream out. part of the reason for putting Elise in the library, that's my Cluedo joke, was to basically get her off this access point out here, so that the only thing being served by that, the only thing that access point was serving were the 3 cameras, and then she was back in the school on our main Wi-Fi to get a good quality signal. But this was very straightforward to set up. I mean, it took me a fraction of the time to set this up than it did the sports day. So this is a video I shot. I'm not going to talk over this because I put a voice. So just going to quick walk through what we've got here. So in the library at the moment, I have Elise. Gives away Elise. She's on the iPad, all working perfectly. So I'm going to walk out to give you an idea of how. Oops, sorry. I've paused my video. One sec. And it's running. You can see it's just running off a PoE injector and little USB power pack up there. I'm going to split that forward a little bit more. There's one over there. Time.
Oh, David, there seems to be it seems to be getting some quite bad feedback.
Okay.
So I think fine. Maybe
I'll jump out of the video. I'll jump out of the video.
Yeah, I think
go here. Next. Go to the next slide. So if I go to try and get my thing to actually play ball. So going back to that, what I had was the 3 cameras. You can see they're actually a long way apart, and that worked really well using that Mevo camera. So it's very difficult. 10 minutes is a very short time to sort of talk very much about live streaming. I hope that if nothing else, I've given you a sense of what is possible. I'm very happy to talk to anybody and answer any questions about bits and pieces. The Mevo camera is something you can just buy from Amazon at the moment. I'm trying to persuade Logitech to open up an education distribution channel for it with some better pricing. So I'm talking to them about trying to do that and getting to talk to a company to do that. But it is a really sort of powerful thing to do. Right, I'm going to have you dropped my share there, is that right?
Yeah, thank you, David. That was I mean, to be honest, that was mind-boggling for me as a non-technical person, but I can see how that's perfect for parental engagement. Those parents who can't make it to a cricket match, can't make it to sports day, the fact that they can log on and have a watch would be absolutely fantastic. I know you said it wasn't that hard, but I think you're probably being rather modest, and you're very skillful. But it's really interesting to see what schools can do and the opportunities that are out there. So thank you for coming along today.
One thing I will say very quickly is the feedback we've had from the streaming has been incredibly popular, has been incredibly positive. So having boarding parents, everything else, people really loved it. We've done all sorts of things, and it's been a huge benefit for the school. So it has been worth the effort.
Great. Thank you, David, for that. I do think for those of you thinking that sounds a bit too much like effort, maybe it's just one to have on your radar. And I know that David is very generous with his time if you do want to speak to him and ask him questions. So I just want to wrap up really with saying you don't know what you don't know. I think we always need to come back to this when we're working in schools, because if we're not communicating and engaging with parents, we don't know what the problems are, and we can't nip them in the bud, and we can't make change. And so I really would encourage that do look at doing school surveys nowadays with Jotform, with SurveyMonkey, Google Forms. It's so easy to ask parents what they want. And saw a really good example last week from a school in West Yorkshire, and they're looking at what they do with their parents' evening. And they sent out a parental survey, and they asked people what they thought, not just about parents' evening, but also about reporting. And from that, they will be able to decide what they're doing, but they'll be able to evidence it, and they'll be able to say, this is why we're doing it this way, to stop that little chat that will go on in WhatsApp groups of people moaning about the change. And that is the key to good communication. It's about taking people on that journey with you. So my final thing really is to say, if you can fill in the feedback form, we would be really grateful, because that is how we can evolve our events and our portals. So please do that. And I'm just going to finish with the great quote: you can please some of the people some of the time, all of the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time, but you can never please all of the people all of the time. And I think for all of us on this call as senior leaders in independent schools, we need to hold on to that. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you particularly to Simon and David. If you can complete the form, that would be fantastic. And Jennifer's asked if you've got any good examples of parent surveys. Yes, I have, Jennifer, so I can send those through to you. But what I'd like to do now really is either say goodbye, or if anybody's got anything they're particularly proud of, which is a good example of best school practice, please do unmute yourself or any questions.